Welcome to Heart Over Gold, the channel where love, kindness, and humanity shine brighter than any fortune. In today's story, Elizabeth Irvin, once a quiet and supportive wife to powerful financier Richard Cruz, found herself betrayed when Richard's affair with influencer Sophia Marin was revealed. What he didn't know was that Elizabeth was the true mastermind behind the scenes. Using her own wealth and influence, she orchestrated a calculated revenge, ultimately exposing Richard's lies at the Raina Cat Show. With her new daughter and a thriving career, Elizabeth proved that quiet strength and strategy can bring even the most powerful down. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, and keep up with our latest stories. The Queen's checkmate. What if the king realized, too late, that he had been playing on the Queen's chessboard all along? A paparazzi snapshot is more than just a photo. It captures a truth, a single devastating moment, frozen forever. For Richard Cruz, a powerful financier in Boston, that moment was rapidly approaching. He stood beneath the sparkling chandeliers of a Paris ballroom, his arm possessively around his latest fling, an influencer named Sophia Marin. He felt like the king of his world, orchestrating a flawless secret life. But across the city, in a quiet, luxurious suite, his pregnant wife, Elizabeth, was reviewing the guest list for the very event he was attending. An event she secretly owned. She wasn't just a bystander in his game. She was the mastermind behind the entire board. What would you do if you were betrayed? Confront your partner? Or plan your own epic revenge? Share your thoughts in the comments, and make sure to subscribe to see how this story unfolds. The silence in the luxury penthouse of Richard Cruz and Elizabeth Irvin in Beacon Hill, Boston, was far from peaceful. It was loaded with unsaid words hanging thick in the air. The minimalist furniture seemed to echo the emptiness between them. From their high-rise, Boston looked like a glowing circuit board, complex, interconnected. For Elizabeth, it felt like a gilded cage. At 32, Elizabeth Irvin carried the quiet grace of someone who came from old money. Wealth that didn't need to announce itself. The Irvins had made their fortune in European textiles, a legacy of artistry and business savvy she had inherited fully. Yet, when she married Richard Cruz 5 years ago, she had stepped aside, allowing his success in investment funds to take center stage. He was the sun, and she, as he assumed, was just a planet orbiting him. He was wrong. Recently, the distance between them had grown from a small crack into an unbridgeable chasm. Richard's work had become a fortress. Long nights no longer just dragged on. They stretched into entire nights. Business trips, once discussed together, were now simply announced. The latest? A week in Paris. "It's the final push for the Dervé acquisition," he said, loosening his tie as he walked into their vast bedroom. He didn't look at her. His eyes were already glued to his phone. "It's absolutely critical." Elizabeth sat on the edge of the bed, one hand gently cradling the soft curve of her belly. 4 months pregnant, she felt both joy and a deep vulnerability. "Paris," she whispered softly. "Finances don't wait, Ella," he replied with a dismissive shrug. The nickname, once used with affection, now carried only disdain. He tossed his jacket over a chair. "You know how this goes." She did know. But she also knew that Dervé had no significant operations in Paris. Its headquarters were in Milan. And she was well aware that Paris Fashion Week was starting in 3 days. The pieces fit together with a sickening certainty. For months, she had seen the signs. The unfamiliar perfume scent, the way he hoarded his phone, the credit card statements for gifts she never received, a Cartier bracelet, dinner reservations for 2. And then there were the whispers on social media. The anonymous tips with screenshots of Sophia Marin, a stunning influencer whose life seemed to mirror Richard's travel schedule. Sophia's latest post showed a long-stemmed rose on silk sheets. The caption, "Paris is always a good idea. Can't wait for a week of magic." A cold panic mixed with a surge of rage inside Elizabeth. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the insult to her intelligence. Richard had believed she was the naive, quiet wife, content with arranging flowers and planning charity galas while he built his empire and his harem. He had forgotten who she was, forgotten the Irvin blood running through her veins. While Richard built his fortune through public acquisitions, Elizabeth had been managing hers quietly. After her father's death 2 years ago, she inherited the Irvin family trust, an impressive portfolio kept so discreet that Richard's Wall Street bravado looked clumsy in comparison. She ran Veritas Capital, a firm so old and low-key that no one suspected its true power. Her lead advisor, Sebastian Lell, a silver-haired man in his 60s with the calm of a chess master, was the firm's public face. To the world, Elizabeth was just a financier's wife, but to a select few, she was GV, the unseen force behind Veritas. Recently, Veritas had made a quiet but significant investment. They became the sole financial backers of Rena Kat's comeback collection. Rena, once a brilliant but volatile designer, had vanished from the industry, and her show was poised to be the highlight of Paris Fashion Week. Richard knew none of this. He saw her inheritance as a mere cushion to fall back on. He had no idea that her fortune could dwarf his entire investment fund without breaking a sweat. As he finished packing for Paris, Elizabeth made a decision. The quiet sadness that had defined her for months transformed into something sharper, colder, and more relentless. She wouldn't confront him. She wouldn't cry or scream. That was the reaction he expected. Instead, she would let him walk straight into her world. A world he didn't even know existed. "Take care, Richard," she said calmly. Standing, she adjusted his collar, her fingers brushing coolly against his skin. He barely noticed. She searched his eyes for the man she had once married, but all she saw was a stranger. Small and distant, always so thoughtful, he said, offering her a quick, shallow kiss on the cheek. It felt more like the touch of a stranger. "Don't wait up for me." When the door closed, the silence in the penthouse returned. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was filled with the hum of a carefully crafted plan. Elizabeth walked to her home office and dialed Sebastian. "Change of plans," she said, her voice firm. "Book a suite at Le Bristol and a private jet. I'm going to Paris." Paris greeted Richard Cruz with the golden autumn light that made everything look expensive. He breezed through the private terminal at Labor Airport with his Louis Vuitton bag over his shoulder. He was at ease in his world of privilege. Sophia Moran was waiting for him, practically buzzing with excitement. She rushed toward him, a blur of blonde hair and Dior perfume. "Richard, you made it!" "I wouldn't miss it for the world," he said with a smug smile, basking in the attention. This was the life he craved: power, money, and a beautiful woman on his arm. A world away from the cold, distant atmosphere of his penthouse and his increasingly absent wife. Sophia's excitement and his smug satisfaction were all he needed to validate his success. He had Eleanor, the beautiful, stable wife, an asset. But Sophia was fun, easy. She required nothing but attention and gifts. He had plenty of both. Their suite at the Four Seasons George V was lavish, with views of the Eiffel Tower. Sophia took full advantage, posing for selfies and posting them for her hundreds of thousands of Instagram followers. For 2 days, they immersed themselves in the Parisian fantasy, shopping and dining at the best spots, basking in the envy of others. Richard sent Eleanor a cursory text each morning saying, "Meeting's going well, exhausted, love you." Meanwhile, Eleanor was working behind the scenes in a completely different Paris, quiet, elegant, and commanding. She had arrived hours after Richard, unnoticed and unbothered. Her suite was transformed into a control center. Sebastian Lel was there, waiting with a stack of files. "Everything's in order, GV," he said, handing her a tablet. Eleanor scanned the documents, focused and sharp. Gone was the heartbroken woman from days ago. In her place stood Irvin, quiet, calculated, and ready for the final move. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for the legacy her child would inherit. "Let's review the seating map," she said, her voice steady. "I want to make a few adjustments." The next day, a personalized floral arrangement Sophia had raved about, online intended for their suite, was accidentally delivered to a rival influencer's room, who promptly posted a thank you to the anonymous sender, sparking a minor social media feud. They were pinpricks, small irritations designed to fray the edges of Richard's perfect fantasy. Elizabeth monitored it all from her suite, a spark of cold satisfaction in her eyes. She saw Sophia's posts, the carefully constructed images of bliss, and felt a cold pity for the girl. She was a pawn, a temporary distraction. The real battle was between Eleanor and the man who had so grievously underestimated her. One evening, feeling the need for some air, Eleanor and Sebastian decided to have dinner at a small, discreet bistro her father had loved in the Lemurie district. As they sat in a secluded corner, the bell above the door chimed. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Richard and Sophia walked in. They were laughing, his arm around her shoulders. They hadn't seen her. Panic gripped Eleanor for a split second. Her instinct was to flee, to hide. But then she looked at Sebastian, whose expression remained perfectly neutral. He simply raised his menu, creating a small screen. Eleanor took a deep breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. She held her own menu, her hands trembling. Peeking over the edge, she watched them. She saw Richard pull out Sophia's chair, the image of a gentleman. She watched him lean in and whisper something in her ear that made her throw her head back and laugh. It was an intimate, devastatingly normal scene of a couple in love. But as she watched, the pain began to recede, replaced by an icy resolve. She saw him not as the husband who betrayed her, but as an opponent. She analyzed his movements, his expressions. He was careless. He was arrogant. He was so confident in his own cunning that he couldn't imagine a world in which he wasn't in total control. He was sitting less than 20 FT from the woman who held his public and professional life in the palm of her hand, and he was completely oblivious to it. "He's a fool, my dear," Sebastian murmured, not looking up from his menu. Eleanor lowered hers slowly, her gaze fixed on her husband. A faint cold smile touched her lips. "Yes, he is," she whispered. "And he has no idea what's about to hit him." They finished their dinner in silence, leaving before Richard and Sophia had ordered their main course. Stepping out into the cool Parisian night, Elizabeth felt a profound shift within herself. The fear was gone. The pain was a distant echo. All that remained was the plan. The stage was almost set. The actors were in place. The final act was about to begin, the grand revelation. The days leading up to the Renara Volkov show were a whirlwind of controlled chaos. For Renara's team, it was the final push of stitching, fitting, and light design. For Richard and Sophia, it was the social peak of their Parisian fantasy. And for Elizabeth, it was the time for quiet, deliberate moves on the chessboard. From her command center at Le Bristol, she orchestrated the final preparations with a general's precision. She approved the musical selection, a haunting orchestral piece that would build to a powerful crescendo. She reviewed the guest list one last time, a who's who of the fashion world, and most importantly, she paid special attention to two names, Richard Cruisend, Sophia Marine. Their tickets, originally secured by Richard's assistant after a series of aggressive calls, were for seats A1 and A2 in the front row, the best seats in the house directly in the sightlines of the runway photographers. Eleanor looked at the digital seating map with a faint smile on her lips. "Sebastian," she called, her voice quiet. "I need a small change in the seating." "Yes, Chief," he said. "Move Mr. Cruz and his guest from A1 and Dedicadu to A11 and A12. Sebastian raised an eyebrow. "That's still front row, but it's on the end. Press photographers rarely focus there. It's considered less prestigious." "Exactly." Eleanor said he will be seen, but he will not be the center of attention. "You want him to feel a slight sting, a confusion. I want him to wonder why a man of his stature was pushed aside." The change was made with a few quiet taps. It was a subtle act of sabotage, a prelude to the main event. Richard received the updated ticket confirmation via email. He barely looked at it, seeing only the words front row and forwarding it to Sophia with a smug message. As promised, the best. He was too busy taking calls and projecting the image of a man closing a multi-million-dollar deal to notice the small detail of the seat numbers. Sophia, however, did notice. As an influencer, the currency of her world was proximity to power and the camera lens. Seats A1 and A2 were prime real estate. A11 and A12 were acceptable, but not the statement she had been promised. "Richard, are you sure these are the best seats?" she asked with a slight whine as she looked at the email. "My friend is in A4 for the Chanel show, and says anything past A10 is practically social Siberia." Richard frowned, taking the phone from Sophia. He saw the numbers and felt a familiar sting of irritation. It was an insult. A man like him belonged at the very center. He immediately called his assistant. "Rick, what the hell is this?" He barked into the phone, his voice low but sharp. "A11 and A12, I told you to get the center seats." Rick's agitated voice came back from Boston. "Mr. Cruz, I'm so sorry. I confirmed A1 and A2. I have the original email. They must have changed it on their end." They sent an apology, saying there was a last-minute shift to accommodate a representative of the investment group sponsoring the show. They were very discreet. Richard's annoyance dissipated, replaced by a grudging respect. It was a power game, and he understood power. He might not be at the center, but he was still front row. It was a minor setback. "Fine," he snapped, hanging up. He turned to Sophia, his confidence restored. "Small administrative error. Apparently the mysterious billionaire sponsor of the show needed the prime seats for their people. Don't worry, we'll still be the most photographed couple there." Sophia pouted, but accepted his explanation. The mysterious billionaire sponsor angle was at least a good story to tell her followers. The incident was a small victory for Elizabeth. She had successfully planted the first seed of doubt in Richard's unassailable self-confidence, and she had done it from afar without showing her hand. The day before the show, a more significant problem arose. Sebastian arrived at Eleanor's suite with a worried expression. "We have a problem," he said. "Rena is threatening to pull the final piece." Eleanor's brow furrowed. The final piece was the collection's masterpiece, an intricate hand-bead gown that had taken over 800 hours to create. It was the emotional and artistic core of the entire show. "Why?" Eleanor asked. She says it's too personal, too revealing. She's having a crisis of confidence. She's locked herself in her studio and won't talk to anyone. This wasn't a simple seating arrangement fix. This could jeopardize the entire event. A multi-million-dollar investment and countless hours of work. The old Eleanor would have panicked, would have deferred to Sebastian. But the new Eleanor stood up, her resolve hardening. "Prepare the car," she said. "I'll talk to her myself." "Gee, are you sure?" The investor has always remained anonymous. "It's part of the mystique." "The mystique won't matter if there's no show," she countered. "Rena doesn't need to know I'm Eleanor Cruz. She just needs to meet GV from Verdus Capital." Renara Volkov's studio was a chaotic explosion of creativity. Rolls of fabric, sketches, and half-finished garments were strewn everywhere. Rena was a woman in her 40s with fiery red hair and eyes that burned with a fiercely unstable intensity. She was sitting on the floor, surrounded by discarded sketches. A bottle of vodka sat on a nearby table. "I can't do it," she said, her voice raw, not even looking up. "That dress is everything I am. It's my failure, my hope, my entire soul, sending it out onto that runway to be judged by those vultures. I can't." Eleanor walked slowly into the room, her presence quiet and centered. She didn't lecture or issue demands. She knelt, movements careful due to her pregnancy, and picked up a discarded sketch of the final dress. "It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen, Rena," she said softly. Rena looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of suspicion and despair. "What would you know? You're just the money." "I am more than that," Eleanor said, her gaze steady. My family has been in the textile business for over a century. I grew up with fabrics and thread. I know what it takes to create something like this. This isn't just a dress. It's a resurrection." She paused, letting the word hang in there. "You're not afraid of them judging the dress, Rena. You're afraid of them seeing you, and you're afraid they'll love it, because if they love it, it means you have to keep going. And that is more terrifying than any failure." Rena looked at her hard facade cracking. Eleanor had seen past the artistic temperament to the raw fear beneath. In that moment, Eleanor wasn't a client or an investor. She was a kindred spirit, a woman who also understood what it meant to hide, to be afraid, and to finally choose to step into the light. "The world needs to see this, Rena," Eleanor continued, her voice full of a quiet strength. "You need to see it. You need to see that dress walk down the runway and remember who you are." Tears sprang to the designer's eyes. She nodded slowly, a silent capitulation. The crisis was averted. Leaving the studio, Eleanor felt a sense of power that had nothing to do with money or revenge. It was the power of competence, of connection, of stepping out of the shadows and leading. Richard thought with chilling clarity that he had never seen this side of her. He had never wanted to. He had married the AI's, the ornament. He had no idea he had married the queen. The final reveal the day of the Renara Volkov show dawned gray and cloudy. Inside the pavilion, however, the atmosphere was electric. The venue was an architectural masterpiece, its historical elegance a brilliant contrast to the avant-garde collection it was about to host. In her suite at Laristal, Eleanor was the picture of calm. She had chosen her outfit with meticulous care. It wasn't a rival designer's piece, nor was it ostentatious. It was a custom-made emerald green silk dress designed by the young tour she had chosen to patronize. The dress was simple, elegant, and accommodating to her pregnancy, accentuating the soft curve of her belly rather than hiding it. It was adrenation of life, of the future, of quiet, unshakable power. She wore her mother's small, bright diamond earrings, and her hair was pulled back in a classic bun. She wasn't dressing for a battle. She was dressing for a coronation. Sebastian arrived to escort her. "The car is ready, Chief. We'll use the private back entrance. Noon will see you until the appointed moment." He paused, looking at her. "You look radiant." "I feel tranquil," Eleanor admitted, placing a hand on her belly. "For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Across the city, the atmosphere in Richard and Sophia's suite was decidedly different. A frantic whirlwind of glamorous preparation. Sophia had a team of stylists working on her, transforming her into a glittering spectacle. She had chosen a revealing sequin dress that left little to the imagination. "Is this too much?" she asked Richard for the 10th time, posing in front of the mirror. You look like $1,000,000, he said, distracted. He was on the phone with his stockbroker in Boston. The acquisition he had used as a cover was real, but it wasn't going as well as he had projected. There were complications, whispers of a competing bid, a quiet, aggressive investment firm. The pressure was mounting, and his Parisian escape was beginning to feel less like a vacation and more like a necessary distraction. He hung up the phone with a frustrated sigh and looked at himself in the mirror. He wore a custom Tom Ford suit, a PC Philippe watch on his wrist. He looked in every way the master of the universe. Yet a strange sense of unease had been gnawing at him for the last day. The seating change, the issue with the deal. They were minor things, but they were cracks in the perfect facade of his control. He dismissed it as stress. Tonight was about forgetting all that. It was about showing up with the most beautiful woman in the room and reminding the world who Richard Cruz was. As they made their way to the venue, their car was surrounded by photographers. Sophia reveled in it, smiling and posing, while Richard maintained a look of bored indifference, a carefully cultivated mask of power. They made their grand entrance, the flashes exploding around them. They were the couple of the moment, a walking embodiment of wealth and glamour. They found their seats, A11 and A12. Richard's jaw tightened slightly at the sight of the center seats, A1 to A4, which were still empty, marked with a simple, discreet, reserved card. Who were these people so important they could arrive after everyone else? He wondered. The lights began to dim. A hush fell over the crowd. The air crackled with anticipation. Richard put his arm around Sophia, pulling her close. He leaned in and whispered, "Enjoy the show. I bought you this." It was a lie, of course, but it was the kind of lie he knew she wanted to hear. Backstage, Elizabeth stood in the shadows. She could see the audience, a sea of expectant faces lit by the glow of their phones. She saw Richard and Sophia, their heads together. A perfect picture of his betrayal. A pang of the old hurt shot through her, sharp and sudden. It was the last breath of the woman she used to be. She took a deep breath, stifled it, and replaced it with cold, hard clarity. Renara Volkov stood beside her, her hands trembling. "I can't believe this is happening," she whispered. "You earned this," Eleanor said, giving her arm a gentle squeeze. "Now go out and take your bow when the time comes. You'll be brilliant." The opening notes of the haunting orchestral score began to play. The first model walked onto the runway. Renara Katz's comeback show had begun, and with it, the final countdown to Richard Cruz's downfall. The storm had arrived. The show was more than just a collection of clothes. It was a symphony of fabric and form. Rena Volkov, fueled by years of repressed creativity and now emboldened by Eleanor's faith, had created a masterpiece. The first pieces were dark and structured architectural wonders of wool and leather that spoke of confinement and struggle. The audience was captivated. The usual chatter and phone use replaced by a reverent silence. Richard, despite himself, was impressed. He recognized a good investment when he saw one. The craftsmanship was impeccable. The vision was singular. He made a mental note for his assistant to find out who was behind Rena's money. There might be an opportunity there. Beside him, Sophia filmed every look for her Instagram story, providing an on-air commentary. As the show progressed, the collection transformed. The dark, rigid silhouettes softened, giving way to flowing silks and rich velvets in shades of sapphire, amethyst, and finally a triumphant glittering gold. It was a narrative of emergence, of breaking free. The tension in the room built with the rising orchestral score. Each look more stunning than the last. Eleanor watched from the shadows, her heart swelling with pride for Rena. But she was also watching Richard. She saw his appraising gaze, the way his mind calculated opportunities. He saw the show as a commodity, a possible acquisition. He had no concept of the soul that had been poured into it. He was a predator, and the entire world she'd built was to him just another hunting ground. Then came the finale. The music softened to a single haunting cello melody. A collective gasp ran through the audience as the final model walked onto the runway. She wore the dress, the one that had taken 800 hours to create, the one Rena almost pulled. It was a column of midnight blue silk, so heavily hand-beaded with crystals and pearls that it seemed to absorb the light and reflect a field of stars. It moved like liquid night, a celestial body brought to earth. It was a work of art, pure and simple. The model paused at the end of the runway, and for a moment the whole world seemed to stop. Then the room erupted. The applause was deafening. A roar of approval and awe. People were standing. The camera flashes were now a blinding, frantic strobe light. As the model retreated, a visibly overwhelmed Rena Kat was ushered onto the runway by her team. Tears streamed down her face as she took a bow. She raised her hands for silence, and slowly the room calmed. "Thank you," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "Thank you all for being here. Returning like this is a dream. I could not have done it alone. I have my incredible team, my models. But there is one person without whom none of this, not a single thread, would have been possible." Richard leaned forward slightly, intrigued. The mysterious sponsor. This was the moment. He expected some European industrialist or an Arab sheikh to be named. "This person found me when I had lost faith in myself," Rena continued, her voice growing stronger. "They invested not just their money, but their belief. They demanded excellence, but they did so with grace and a deep understanding of the artistic soul. The world knows them by their firm's name, Veritas Capital. but I know them as a partner and a visionary. Tonight, for the first time, my partner has agreed to step out of the shadows. Please join me in welcoming the true force behind this collection, the head of Veritas Capital, my collaborator, my friend Eleanor Irvin. The name hit the room like a sonic boom. Hundreds of camera lenses swiveled in unison away from the stage and toward the front row. They searched, found their target, and fired. Richard had been applauding, a polite smile on his face, when he heard his wife's name. His hands froze halfway to clap. The smile dissolved, replaced by a mask of absolute disbelief. His mind reeled, unable to process the information. Eleanor, his quiet, docile Eleanor Veritas Capital, the secret sponsor. It was impossible. It was a nightmare. He looked from the stage to the seating map in his mind. The reserved seats A1 and A2, the representative of the investment group. It was all for her. The shift in his own seating hadn't been an administrative error. It had been a deliberate, calculated insult. Sophia beside him was equally stunned. Her mouth was open, her perfectly made-up lip forming a silent O. She looked from the radiant, powerful woman on the stage to the pale man beside her, and the truth slammed into her. The woman on stage was his wife. The pregnant wife he had told her was visiting her mother in the countryside. The sound of the camera flashes was now a relentless assault, a machine gun fire of humiliation directed squarely at Richard. He felt 1,000 eyes on him, their stares a mix of pity, scorn, and delight. His perfect world, his carefully constructed double life, had not only been exposed, but publicly and spectacularly detonated. On the stage, Eleanor didn't look at him, not once. She stood tall, a serene smile on her face, one hand resting on her belly. She looked out at the adoring crowd, at the industry that was now her command. She was not the scorned wife. She was the victor. She had taken the stage he thought was his, and revealed it was her kingdom all along. She leaned into the microphone Rena held. "True art deserves to be seen," she said, her voice clear and steady. "And true strength is often found in the places where you least expect it." Her words were for the audience, but her message was for one man only. It was aid-renation of independence, a final devastating checkmate. Under the glare of the spotlights, Richard Cruz finally saw his wife for who she truly was, and in the same instant, he realized he had lost everything. The aftermath, the chaos that erupted after Eleanor's speech was total. The Cruz name was now the story. Guards struggled to maintain order as journalists and bloggers swarmed the front row. "Mr. Cruz, what is your reaction? Is your wife the secret investor? Sophia, did you know Mr. Cruz was married?" Richard was frozen in his seat, the flashes reflecting in his eyes. A statue in a hurricane he himself had caused. Sophia, regaining her senses first, did the only thing she knew how to do. She ran, grabbing her purse. She pushed her way through the crowd, her face a mask of horror and humiliation. She was collateral damage, a footnote that was already being written. Richard finally moved, his limbs stiff and robotic. His only thought was to get to Eleanor, to talk to her, to control the narrative, to fix this. He pushed his way toward the stage, but a wall of security guards materialized, blocking his path. They were large men in immaculate suits, polite but unmoving. "I need to see my wife," he growled, his rehorse wooed. "Mrs. Cruz is unavailable at the moment, sir," the head of security said. Behind them, Sebastian Lell appeared, his face a mask of cold disappointment. "Richard," Sebastian said, the use of his first name, a stark, deliberate violation of professional decorum. "I believe you have caused enough of a disturbance. It is time for you to leave." Richard felt a fresh wave of betrayal. This man had been a father figure to Eleanor for years now. He looked at him with the cold eyes of an executioner. "I work for the head of Veritas Capital," Sebastian stated simply, "and my employer has requested you be escorted from the premises." Humiliation burned. To be ejected from his own wife's event was an indignity he could barely comprehend. Defeated, he allowed the guards to lead him out a side exit. The air felt thin and he struggled to breathe. His phone vibrated incessantly in his pocket. A frantic buzz of missed calls and messages from his partners and PR team in Boston. The story was already online, Financial Titan. Richard Cruz's wife revealed his secret magnate in stunning public unveiling. The headlines were brutal, painting him as a fool and a cheat. He returned to the Four Seasons to find his fantasy suite stripped of all its magic. Sophia's belongings were gone. He was alone. He tried calling Eleanor, but the call went straight to voicemail. He sent a frantic barrage of texts. "Gabby, we need to talk. This is a misunderstanding. I can explain everything. Please call me." Silence. He poured himself a large scotch and turned on the television. Every French news channel, every international-style show led with the story. They showed the clip of Eleanor on the runway, looking regal and powerful. Then they cut to a grainy, zoomed-in shot of his face, his look of shock, a perfect meme of his downfall. They were dissecting his life, his marriage, and his infidelity for the world to see. An hour later, there was a knock at his door. He flung it open, expecting Eleanor. It was a hotel manager flanked by two bellhops. "Mr. Cruz," the manager said, "we have been informed that the reservation for this suite has been cancelled. The bill has been paid in full by Veritas Capital. We can of course secure you another room at the standard rate." Richard stared at him, stunned. She was throwing him out, not just from her event, but from his own hotel suite. A suite he thought he had paid for. He realized the credit card he had been using was a supplementary card on an account controlled by her family trust. He had been funding his affair with Hermione. The humiliation was so profound. It was almost physical. He felt sick. He felt he packed his bags in a daze and checked into a standard room, a sterile, anonymous box that felt like a prison cell. Finally, his phone buzzed with Animail. It wasn't from Eleanor. It was from her lawyer, a man he recognized from one of Boston's most formidable divorce firms. The email was short and brutally efficient. It informed him that divorce proceedings were being initiated on the grounds of adultery. It stated that under their prenuptial agreement, which he had insisted on signing to protect his assets, any infidelity on his part would void the asset division in her favor. Attached was a term sheet. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a surrender document. She wasn't just leaving him. She was systematically dismantling the empire he thought was his. Veritas Capital, it turned out, had significant non-public stakes in several companies his fund had been targeting. She had the power to disrupt his business in ways he had never imagined. Finally, he understood this was not a crime of passion. This was a premeditated assassination of his character, his reputation, and his career. Every step had been planned. The public unveiling, the media storm, the lawyers moving in for the kill. He sat on the edge of the hotel bed, the email glowing on his phone screen. The scotch did nothing to numb the feeling of being gutturally outmaneuvered. He had viewed Eleanor as a beautiful, fragile object to be possessed, a masterpiece for his collection. He had never bothered to look at the artist's signature to understand the mind and will that had created her. He had loved the gilded cage, not realizing she held the key. Her silence was no longer just the absence of sound. It was the sound of his world ending. The final victory 6 months later, the cherry trees were blooming in Boston Common. The world had moved on, but the landscape of several lives had been irrevocably altered. The name Richard Cruz was now a cautionary tale whispered in Boston's financial circles. The brutal public nature of his divorce had been a spectacle. Eleanor's legal team, armed with irrefutable proof and the full force of her financial power, had been relentless. He lost more than half of his net worth, but the real damage was to his reputation. Investors, spooked by his recklessness and the revelation that his wife had been the shrewdest financial mind all along, began pulling their money from his fund. The acquisition he had been pursuing crumbled when Veritas Capital quietly backed his competitor. His empire, built on a foundation of aggressive confidence, collapsed when that confidence was exposed as empty arrogance. He was forced to sell his penthouse, downsize his firm, and fade into a world of diminished influence, a ghost of the titan he once was. Sophia Marine's 15 minutes of fame had been brutal. She became a pariah, a meme for infidelity. Brands dropped her, and the comments on her social media were a toxic wasteland. She tried to sell her story, but it only painted her as a pathetic, clueless woman who ruined a home. Eventually, she deleted her accounts and vanished from the public eye. A casualty of a war she didn't even know she was fighting. And Elizabeth prospered. She gave birth to a healthy daughter she named Ava Irvin. She kept her mother's maiden name for her daughter, a deliberate choice to root her in a legacy of female strength and resilience, unblemished by the Cruz name. Veritas Capital, no longer operating in the shadows, became a major force in the worlds of tech, fashion, and sustainable business. Eleanor as GV was the subject of glowing profiles in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. They called her the Velvet Hammer, a brilliant, intuitive investor with an iron will. She never spoke publicly of her divorce or of Richard. She didn't have to. Her success was the only statement she needed to make. She moved out of the cold, minimalist penthouse and bought a historic home in the city, filling it with warmth, art, and the happy babbling of her daughter. Sebastian Lell remained her unshakable advisor, now a doing honorary grandfather to Ava. One bright spring afternoon, Eleanor was strolling with Ava in a stroller through a quiet part of the park. The sun was warm on her face. She felt a deep sense of peace, a completeness she hadn't known was possible. Her life was not what she had planned, but it was hers, built by her own hands and on her own terms. As she rounded a corner, she saw him. Richard was sitting alone on a park bench, looking older, smaller. He wore a simple polo shirt and trousers far removed from his former armor of tailored suits. He was staring at the water, his expression empty. He didn't see her. For a moment she considered stopping. What would she say? What could be said? But she realized there was nothing left. He was a chapter in a different book, a different life. Her story was no longer about him. It was about the little girl sleeping in the stroller in front of her. It was about the future. With a quiet sense of finality, she adjusted the blanket around Ava and continued on her way, walking away from the man on the bench and toward the bright sunshine of her new life. She had not only survived his betrayal, she had used its fire to forge a new legacy, stronger and more beautiful for herself and her daughter. The true power lies not in the noise you make, but in the quiet, strategic moves that change the entire game. Eleanor's story is a powerful reminder that the quietest people in the room are often the most observant, and that the best response to injustice is to build an empire so magnificent that your detractors become irrelevant footnotes in your own incredible biography.